Greetings, everyone, and a warm welcome back to Intersections, where our aspiration is to explore the highest in human potential, both at an individual level, family level, community, humanity level. And we do that by dissolving distinctions and boundaries in order for us to be able to, through the cross currents, make new insights and possibilities emerge. And I love what you just said, Urania, here about like while you were waiting, because I know we started a little bit late. That why not just say a prayer for the world? What a beautiful, offering, to make to us. Do use chat as a way to get connected, share where you're from, and build some energy in a more collective way here with all of us. It is a great pleasure for me to have in our midst Angela Duckworth. Let me take a moment to introduce her, and then we will invite her, into our midst as well. So Angela is a pioneering psychologist and a best-selling author of a book on grit. This is a book that has been critically acclaimed for the manner in which it is helping advance our understanding of what it truly takes to create success and meaning, in life. She has had a TED Talk that is among the most viewed of all times, reflecting therefore on the hunger, in humanity for ideas and learnings like this. She's also the founder and CEO of Character Lab, who is on a mission as a team to advance scientific insights that can help children thrive. She's an award-winning professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, where she participates, among others, in this initiative on behavior change for good, as well as the People Analytics program at the Wharton School. She's founded a summer school in the past for underserved kids that has been translated into a Harvard Kennedy School case study, featured on all leading media, a very visible voice on the breakthroughs coming out in psychology today. A MacArthur Fellow from 2013. She has advised a number of notable institutions in advancing their culture. And on that note, let's bring Angela into our midst. Angela,
Hi.
thank you so much. Hello.
Hi.
It is so nice to have you. Thank you for making the time for our community here. Angela, I want to start by thanking you at a deeper level, at a more personal level, because here's the thing. When I was in high school and I was contemplating my major for college, I had two loves at that time, mathematics and psychology. And I remember, asking some more senior folks who I knew a couple of years into college, show me your psychology books, show me the classes you take. I'm kind of intrigued about this topic a lot. And I looked at them, and it kind of like pulled me down rather than lifted me up, and so painfully so, I decided to kind of like go down the other path. Now, I had a lot of love for mathematics, and I'm grateful I made that journey, and it took me a while to unwean myself from my mathematics addiction, which I did at some point. But what was going on that time, which I think you were smiling about yourself, right, in this moment, is that the emphasis in psychology was so much about the dark states of the human mind, the psychology of evil, depression, and other kind of mental maladies. And I'm grateful to all the psychologists who continue to do good work on that side of the bell curve of like humanity's mental states. But what about flourishing? What about intelligence? What about wisdom? What about greatness and all of those quests, which are also amply, part of who we are. And that's kind of like, in a sense, like my interest, lay on that side. And I went a different direction. I actually went to spirituality, and I was able to draw a lot from that fountain, at that time. But it was always like a latent hunger in me. So when I see what was happening in the 21st century with this explosion of interest from great talent like yourself in really investing on this other side of the bell curve, it just made me feel so enriched and made me feel like, okay, psychology is opening its door to allow me to come in now and participate and engage and learn from you guys. So thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you, Hitendra. My daughter is, one of my daughters is 19, and she is quite literally torn between applied math and more, behavioral science, psychology. And when I smiled as you shared that story, I actually was trying to think of the multiple reasons why you might actually be a little disenchanted from having dipped your toe in the water of psychological science, those decades ago, because some people would say like, oh, this is all about depression and schizophrenia and fascism, but there are other reasons. And I'll just say, for my daughter's ambivalence, it's not really that so much, because as you know, psychology has shifted, but more that psychology is also like a mile wide and an inch deep, unlike economics and unlike, physics and other fields. So anyway, there would be at least a couple of reasons why people might say, yeah, I'm really interested in human nature, but I'm disenchanted and don't want to go in that direction. Anyway, I'm glad that you're still engaged, and I'm still engaged.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've kind of awoken to it as like a late, calling moment in life at about 10 years ago, where I was still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up after, that time in business and with my PhD and everything. And then I realized it's in human potential. It's about human nature. I mean, there's so much. Gandhi once said, he said, the difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would be enough to solve most of the world's problems. And I think that's what you're doing, is you're helping to close those gaps.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think Gandhi and all of our great leaders were all psychologists, right? Because how could they not be? And what is more interesting or more difficult to understand than like the nature of who we are? So yeah, I'm excited to see where you take us.
Well, that's itself such a beautiful quote. What could be more exciting and powerful than the nature of who we are? And we found a little intersection right there between us, because I have one daughter and she's 19 as well, coincidentally.
Oh, we should set them up so they could be friends.
That's true. That's true. So, folks, I know you're here to hear from Angela about this, wonderful path that she's taken in her pioneering research. Angela, I'm going to propose the following. We have a, very precious amount of time together with each other, somewhere around, by the way, folks, about 30 to 35 minutes or so. And there's so much that you have done, but there's so much that you're doing today and are going to do in the years ahead. And I'd like to propose that we take just a few minutes for more of like a synopsis of that early breakthroughs that you've achieved around this theme of grit, because your book is there, your interviews are there, and so folks can actually go to those sources if they aren't already exposed. Although it is my assumption that many of us here are already in fact so exposed, because you've already taught and done so much. So could you just take a few moments to talk about like what in your life journey led you to wanting to invest so much in understanding human nature and in supporting the unfoldment of human nature, especially in children? What was it?
Yeah, so I'm happy to share like a very, fast forward express lane version of the biography that led me to the research on human achievement. I grew up in a family, and actually not just my nuclear family, but my extended family has you could either call it a healthy obsession with achievement or perhaps an unhealthy obsession with achievement, depending on your evaluation of it. But my upbringing led me to believe that achievement was very, very important in life. Maybe the most important thing in life. And again, I'm not saying that was a good thing, but it was true. And then B, I heard so often this kind of like, oh, this cousin's really smart, that cousin's even smarter. And the implicit narrative was that achievement was very much about IQ and about giftedness. And the people who are really great did things kind of magically because they were different from everyone else and so much more innately capable. And I knew that that wasn't me, because even in my homeroom, meaning my classroom of, maybe 30 kids when I was in 5th grade, so I was 10 years old. I mean, even I could look around and say like, well, those two people are smarter than I am. So, what does this imply for the limit on what I could achieve? And I grew up to actually question that assumption and question that narrative, and to ask the question instead, what else is there? Like, how much is possible? And what I came to in the research on grit is that, maybe hidden from view when we see what someone eventually becomes is the process that led them there. And what we inevitably find is not a very short straight line journey, but a long journey with setbacks and lots of practice. And what we see about experts when we go to YouTube and we look at 14 seconds of high achievement is that. But what we don't see is the years where they were kind of a bumbling idiot, honestly, and all the mistakes and rough drafts that are hidden. So I think grit is very much about sustained passion and perseverance over long periods, because that is the nature, I think, of human achievement that is somewhat obscured from view, but in every case that I have studied, pretty much consistently the narrative.
Very nice. There is There's a fair amount that has, I think, emerged over time about the value of, multiplying talent with effort, as a way to get to really hone a craft, hone a skill. But one of your seminal contributions to further advancing that thinking is to recognize that, but also add to that another multiplier of effort, right? That has to do more with the kind of the long run journey, not just the immediate mastery of a skill. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, one way to think of this is like the difference between intensity and duration, right? Or intensity versus consistency. So when people hear the word passion or they think of hard work, maybe the mental image that comes to mind is this like crazy intensity, like, oh, I just pulled 3 all-nighters and or I'm just like really all in, like all, and that's not necessarily bad, but I think what's more indicative to me of somebody who's going to become successful at what they do is the consistency and the duration of their commitment. I mean, let's use the analogy of physical therapy, right? I remember my husband recently had to go to a physical therapist, and he got this set of exercises, and he did them for like 2 hours. I think he was only supposed to do them for half an hour. It's like, oh, great. And that's intensity. But I think what most physical therapists want you to do is just like do these exercises every day, 7 days a week for, maybe forever, depending on what it is that ails you. And luckily I married somebody, my husband, who's like good at consistency too. But I think the intensity, which is what the word passion sounds like, is in some ways a bit of a red herring or a lure, because I actually think the more rare thing and the thing that chips away at a very difficult problem or builds a great corporation or makes a civic change that needs to happen is more this consistency. And so many people start off with intensity and sincerity, but you ask, like, where are they a year later? How many days a week are they thinking about it 5 years later? Are they still in the game 10 years later? And the answer is very often no.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were speaking about my own journey with meditation. I was drawn to it when I was about 10 years old. I would do these like little small dashes of forays, especially before exams. I really wanted to like appeal to a higher power to like help me. And so I'd be really good. And then I would like go back in my more dissipated ways. And then it was like 20 years into that journey of just like in and out, just sporadically, that I finally came to the conclusion, to your point, that like, look, the teaching path that I have been taught is like one which requires daily discipline. I got to get there, otherwise I'm getting nowhere. I was in my early 30s at that point, and I took it on as like a promise, a commitment to myself for the daily work and the tilling of the soil. And I've not looked back since. It's been about 18 years now, and I feel so grateful for that, like, ultimate like place of grit that I came to. One of the things that I discovered there is that initially I thought it was going to be like a tortured but like deep like commitment to something I really believed in, and I felt that ultimately it'll take me to like the doorway of something beautiful, but that it'll have to be real effortful and torture, a journey.
Yeah, you weren't thinking it was going to be pleasant or fun.
I did, and then you realize that actually after a while it starts to give you a lot of joy to be doing that. You've talked about that in your work in a much more formal way. You've studied this idea about joy being a key part of that experience. Could you talk about that more?
There are two things that are hidden in those comments that you said, or that are in those comments I just want to highlight. I think one is that I do think that joy, getting energy out of what you're doing, I mean, if you do not eventually come to that, I do not think you will be great at what you do. Nobody can, by force of self-discipline and willpower, make themselves do something as obsessively and consistently as people with real grit do. I mean, if I did not enjoy psychology, I would not be even a very good psychologist, I think, much less a great one. Same for writing, same. And by the way, Hitendra, there are things that I don't enjoy. I don't enjoy actually, for example, managing people. Like I have this nonprofit organization, but I don't get energy out of leading a group of people and then watching each of them grow to their potential. Now, I wish I did, but I don't, Therefore, I'd rather write about it and research it and then let somebody else actually directly manage and be the executive. So I think this idea of joy and enjoyment and energy is key. But the second thing I just want to amplify in what you just said is that it's not always possible for us to forecast with accuracy that which will give us joy in the future. So it could be in the very beginning years of something like music or meditation or leadership or writing or anything that you enjoy it more or less than you will in the future. And it can go both ways. You start off really enjoying something and then you get into it and you're like not really getting energy out of it anymore. Or it could be the opposite, as it was for you. So it's not an easy rule of thumb to follow your immediate experience, because that may or may not be a good forecast of your future experience. But I do think at least understanding that being intrinsically fulfilled by your work is necessary, if not sufficient, to becoming great at it. And knowing that there's always going to be a little bit of dynamic change there. So therefore, the human problem is not an easy one, which is like, what should I do? I don't love it right now, but maybe I will learn to. I do love it right now, but I may not always. But at least you have some principles, to navigate by.
Yeah. That makes good sense. That makes good sense to me. You have in your book talked about a framework that I really like. It's something very consistent with the teaching I've been doing at Columbia and at our institute. This notion of sort of growing from the inside out and then also from the outside in. I love that. That's just a wonderful framework. There is one component of this that I'd love for you to weigh in on, which is that. I wonder to what extent that capacity to stay true to the course that you need to in the long run may be in part grounded on the core beliefs or convictions you have, about life, about your philosophy of life, about what you're being placed here on this earth to be and to do and to serve and all of that. I don't know. Have you explored that domain at all?
So, Hitendra, I think you know that I teach an undergraduate course at my university. I'm just, 2 hours driving south of where you are. I'm at University of Pennsylvania, and I just finished teaching this semester, and this course is called Grit Lab. And I had a little over 100 students, all between the ages of 18 and 22. Actually, I threw in a few high school students in there, so I'd say 16 to 22. And they're all asking this question, like, what do I do? And what's my recommendation prescriptively as somebody who studies human development? Like, what do I say to them, right, about how to. Now, I want to correct an error that for about, I don't know how long I've been preaching that the way to be gritty is to have a goal hierarchy where you have a top level goal. Like for me, use psychological science to help children thrive. It's a top level goal. And then I have, sort of 10-year goals and then 5-year sub goals. And then I have, all the way down to my to-do list for today. And it's a hierarchy where each of the sub goals serves a master goal, which serves so very beautiful. It sounds like you could have a map for, the next 2 decades if you're super gritty. But I think I've been wrong in the following way. And I told my young students this. I said, really, who can see that far into the future? I mean, I don't know where I'm going to be in 10 years. In fact, I don't even have clarity about 5 years. And I shared with them that Danny Kahneman, who's, someone we both admire and whom I just adore, frankly. I remember having a conversation with him not too long ago where I was like, Danny, I was sort of plotting this and planning this and how are we going to make behavioral science advance? And, he reminded me that you can only see maybe 2, possibly 3, but 3's a lot, 3 years into the future, because then there's so much uncertainty. Depending on what happens next year is going to change where I want to go. And so you kind of can't map out your entire journey in decades. And what I said to my students is what I'll say to you now is I think I was wrong. Yes, goals are hierarchical. Yes, it is wonderful to have some kind of guiding star, or even you could think of it navigating by some constellation. You're like, my values are benevolence and excellence. Okay, I want to move in that direction. But I think what that allows you to do is say, but I don't know where I need to be 10 years from now. I don't know 5. I know I'm moving in that general direction, and I know I need some kind of plan for the next year or two. And then between, my ultimate general direction, and there's a huge amount of freedom and uncertainty, and I'm not going to try to map it all out. It's not possible.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because both you and I spent time at McKinsey. And, back in those days, I mean, there was a lot of those strategic planning going on, right? Which was like 3-year plans, 5-year plans, and all of that in organizations. And then after that, I went to do a startup, and then, you and I both have been doing entrepreneurial things a little bit, right? In addition to our academic work. And I've come to the same conclusion with regard to even the organizational aspect, not just the individual aspect, that we kind of have to dispense a little bit with that old way of thinking of things in a very programmatic way, and a very research first and then planning and then action.
Linear.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe for again, how you have to have a plan for at least the next year or two, or maybe 3, depending on how complex and large the organization is, but really, when you start getting beyond 2 or 3 years, who knows? Maybe the internet will happen, or maybe global politics will shift, or whatever it is you can't anticipate. So I do think, though, to your point, though, knowing your core values, right? That's what I said to the students on the last day of class. I said, navigate by the stars, right? You cannot have a map that says in 2021 I'll do 2031 I'll be here, 2004. You can't have that kind of map, but you can navigate by the stars, and the stars are your core values and your deepest personal interests. And there are many places that you could get navigating by those stars, and maybe it'll be director at McKinsey, and maybe it'll be a professor, maybe it'll be a nonprofit leader. So yes, of course, navigate by something, but don't try to map it all out with precision, second, third, fourth decade from now.
Yeah. I like that, navigating, by the stars. So you've taught this class at UPenn to the undergraduates based on your work. And any other lessons or learnings for us about how to really support ourselves and others in our journey towards a flourishing and thriving life with what you've learned through your interactions with these undergraduates?
I'll share something that is surprising to me and is consistently true. When I ask my students to evaluate themselves on their passion and their perseverance for long-term goals, and actually when I look at data that's also collected from research studies, I consistently find that people are higher in perseverance than they are in passion. And it's a little non-intuitive, because you would think, what's so hard about passion? It's just doing what you want to do, right? And the perseverance thing sounds harder, deliberate practice every day, being resilient in the face of setbacks and obstacles, taking negative feedback. But I think for many of us, maybe in this conversation together, when you hear that many people struggle more with the direction they're going than the determination and following it, I think it will resonate with a lot of people. I certainly felt that way for many, many years in my life. I would say from 22 to 32, I was really lost in a way. I didn't know what direction to go in, but I was always a hard worker. So I almost prayed for someone just to tell me what to do, because I could easily work 70 hours doing it. I just didn't know where to start. And so I would say that's, if that's some comfort to people who think oh gosh, yeah, I'm a hard worker. I have a great work ethic. I take negative feedback, but I'm still somewhat paralyzed trying to figure out where to set off on my journey, then you're like a lot of people, including me. And the second thing is prescriptively, my recommendation is, as many entrepreneurs say, just go anywhere, just take any step, because no matter what you do, even if you went exactly in the opposite direction, by taking the step you would learn, and then you'd be it's like when your GPS recalculates. It's recalculating, but the only mistake you can make is to not move. And the only mistake is to not move, because then you won't learn anything, and then you will kind of guarantee that you won't get anywhere.
When you just share that, it reminds me of the story of Katharine Graham, the former
publisher of the Washington Post.
Washington Post, yeah. One of my students brought her up to me about a decade ago, and I became such a fan of hers by reading her personal memoirs, and
I read it too.
Yeah, what a story, right? And that moment where her husband commits suicide, she has to take on this family heirloom. She wants to continue to keep it in the family. People expect her as a woman to have to sell it, because women weren't active in leadership roles in business that time. And she didn't know anything about journalism, nor about running a business, but she leaned in. And she talks about how, right, she had so much fear and apprehension, and she had to practice at home, like learning how to say, like at that time, Merry Christmas, like to her kids, to like
Yes.
figure out what to say in the newsroom and all of that. But she kept taking that one step.
Yeah, and then making sure that you're okay with all the missteps. Like if you're a young person and you go off and you do an internship and you absolutely hate it, that's great. Look how much you learned. You learned that you didn't want to do that. You learned that you didn't want to have a boss like that. You learned that you didn't want to become a boss like that. A lot of the remarkable women and men that I study will say things like one I'm just thinking of. She was a chef, like a sous chef, and she basically started this apron company, and now it's like a multi-million-dollar brand. And she just wrote a book. Her name is Ellen Marie Bennett, and she said, "Dream first, details later." And I think for all of us to say, like, yeah, take that step. It could be the right step. It's probably not. It could be the wrong step. It could be exactly the wrong step. But do it first, then figure it out, and then like recalculate. And I think that so many very smart and perfectionistic people don't really like that messiness. But if you can at least recognize that that's pretty much the only way there is to get anywhere, then maybe it will incline you to embrace it a little more comfortably than you would otherwise.
How beautiful. Can I use that as a pivot point to just talk to our audience and say, folks, based on what Angela just said, this idea about dream first and then details later, and as coming from that person, what was her name that you
Ellen Marie Bennett, and I think her book is on the bestseller list right now. So it's a great book. By the way.
Awesome. So now we know about that book, guys. And how about each of you take a moment here to think about what's that step that you've not been really comfortable taking, which if you took, you just never know where it takes you next and takes you next and takes you next. Can each of you think about that? And if some of you can share that in chat as a way to inspire all of us, I think that'll be so cool. And it'll be a gift back for Angela as well, as to your example of a step that you can take here. So let's do it. Cool. I'm going to think about this after this, session as well.
I know. I was going to say we always professors need to do their own homework.
Yeah,
so
true.
Yeah, so I will do the same.
Yes. Wonderful. Lao Tzu once said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step.
Yeah, so you have to take it.
Yeah. So I want to turn to a more kind of meta issue. So you are part of a pioneering, early 21st century, community of psychologists that are really advancing this field in a direction that is giving us so much more deeper insight about human nature. And I would say what's also really cool and remarkable to me is that given my early interest in spirituality, you're actually helping bring these two disciplines, closer to each other, because so much of what is emerging from positive psychology are the kinds of virtues and values and graces that have been, for the most part of world traditions, in ancient times, kindness, compassion, resilience,
humility.
Yeah. So that's beautiful that now we have a scientific lens through which to view it, to unpack it and really define it more carefully, and to have tests and measures for it, and also understand how to go about doing it, and also eliminate some of the some of the chaff from the wheat, right? To kind of get to the core and all of that. Yeah. So that's great, right? But like you're saying, there are stumbles and failures, along the way towards ultimate insight. And if the psychology of 100 years ago, we look at it today and we say oh wow, there's so much of what they didn't know back then. I'm guessing that a psychology of 100 years from now, if we keep doing all the good work, we'll look at us and say there's so much these guys didn't know what they're doing, right? And so we have this thing called the replication crisis that is happening right now, where some of the psychology of the past is being called into question by some new studies or meta studies and all that people are doing. And some of the greatest, strongest, most noted pillars, right, of this discipline are kind of a little bit more shaken up. And I know you faced a little bit of that in the world of grit as well. Can you weigh in on that? What is going on? And how would you guide someone who is both benefiting from a lot, is really interested in tapping into the latest wisdom in psychology, to also stay a little bit mindful and careful and discriminating in the manner in which they assimilate this discipline?
Yeah, the replication crisis is these are the growing pains of science maturing, and the specific criticism is that some of the things that we published as scientists and said, hey, these are the findings and they're more or less facts. I mean, I guess scientists would always put air quotes around facts, like facts until proven that they're not. Like it's not true. So one of the famous ones in psychology is, for example, the ego depletion effect, which is that when people do something that's very hard, like they're trying to solve problems, but they're impossible, and then you give them something else to do, like a proofreading task, that they're actually starting to get worse on that second task. And the idea, which is very sexy, is that your self-control runs out like fuel. It's just sort of like the tank gets empty. And that effect looks not to be nearly as big as it was thought to be, and some would argue like there really is no effect, it's like an illusion of. So that's one example. In my own domain with grit, some would argue that like when you really properly control in statistical ways, like for things like grit really doesn't have actually an effect on achievement. Of course, as a scientist, I then have to process all of this on two levels. One is my own work, and the second one is at a meta level. In my own work, I would say like, oh, but I pre-registered a meta-analysis with over 10,000 people over 10 years and looked, like I can say to you that I think that the basic finding in my own research, which is like when people have a tendency to work really hard over long periods in a consistent direction, that if you ask me, like, does it really predict achievement? I would say yes. Based on my pre-registered, replicated findings, I would say yes. However, I would put a semicolon in that. The amount of the let me say it in a way that's like less jargony. How powerful predictor is grit or anything else that scientists study, but I'll just say grit, like not as powerful as you might think. In other words, the ability to predict how successful someone is going to be, a college applicant, somebody you hire, a young athlete, is for anything actually, like it's extremely like how much we can really predict is like this, and how much is not predicted is like that. So I think I want to say, I think my results replicate, but I think now this begins to get into the meta, and I'll just pause here because we can't talk about this forever, is that one of the very humbling things that we have to recognize as scientists is that no matter what it is, growth mindset, big five conscientiousness, grit, all of these things that psychological and behavioral science have yielded, nudges, the power of the kind of nudges that behavioral economists study. Are they real? I think in most cases, yes, but the effects are very small. And I think the reason why, and I'll end with this, is that human beings are extremely complex, and the world is complex, and you put together the complexity of an individual with the complexity of the world, and then you say like, yeah, but if I know their grit score, can I predict whether they're going to, become a Nobel laureate? It's like not very well.
Yeah. Right. I sympathize with that. I mean, there is, on the one hand, the scientific temperament of wanting to, in a Descartesian kind of way, like break things down into logical, little mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive variables and factors and all of that. But on the other hand, there might be this gestalt of who knows the millions of different interacting things that ultimately make us who we are, and the conditions and the outcomes, right? And that's, I guess that's the beautiful puzzle that we're all being invited here to solve for. I
think instead of maybe there was a point in history, maybe for most of human history, either you thought like a scientist or you thought more like an artist, or so, on one hand you're like, I think we're now in the 21st century, and I think the people who are attracted to, this kind of conversation, would want to do both. They would want to read the science. They want to understand, how the vaccine was developed, and, randomized controlled trials, and yet they would also like looking at philosophy and reading poetry and understanding that with the humility in which we would say that any of these ways of trying to understand the universe and ourselves, they're all limited. It doesn't mean we should, throw out one or throw out the other. But I think just recognizing the limits of any way of trying to understand ourselves is useful. And I think in the 21st century, more and more people will want to think like a scientist, but also think like a philosopher, and also, understand the spiritual traditions have something to offer, and art and music and poetry and more.
I love that. It reminds me of, Leonardo da Vinci. He once said, study the art in science. And he said, then study the science and art, and approach everything as in everything connects to everything. Everything connects to everything. And that's what you've said here. Beautiful. One of the maybe steps in that direction that I see emerging today in your field of psychology, I say yours because I'm more a consumer of it. I'm more of a packager of it. I take the good work that scientists like you are doing, and then kind of like seek to bring it into a practical form for leadership and organizations and beyond. But one of those, I think, is this notion that you might call like fusing opposites. In other words, not to think about qualities in very monolithic terms, that the right thing to do is X.
Either or, but more some like
right?
kind of dialectic, or I mean, not even using that word, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you did that so beautifully in your book when you spoke about parenting, right? And you spoke about what's the right way to parent. Is it to be like a demanding kind of parent, or is it to be more like a supportive kind of parent? And then you emerge with this conclusion. Can you share that with the audience?
About a century ago, a very famous psychologist by the name of Watson had this, idea that, really good parenting was extremely demanding and not very supportive. And that would be the way to raise children who were strong, disciplined, productive people. But I think one of the many reasons why that is bad advice for parents is that when we think supportive, demanding, the natural thing is to think either or, and then to just try to find the magic point on the continuum. 70% this, 30%, is it 40-60, is it 90-10? And it's a false choice, because it is possible to be supportive maximally and actually maximally demanding, because they're not opposites. Supportiveness, actually, there's lots of research now on parenting and parenting styles, looks like two things. It's warmth and caring, that's one thing, and it's also respect for the autonomy of your child. And so you can be maximally supportive in that you love your kid more than anything, and you really respect them as independent people who may disagree with you and want to go their own way. At the same time, you can be extremely demanding in the sense that you hold your children to high standards morally, or in other ways as well. And so you don't have to think either I should be a supportive parent or I should be a demanding parent. You don't even have to think like, well, I'm going to be 30, 70. You could be 100, right? Like you could be that. And that is actually, I think, research suggests, and also I think, by extension, leadership is like parenting in so many ways, that to be a great leader, to be a great parent, is to be someone who the people who are following you and that would say, like, this person truly cares about me. They completely respect me, and wow, they're tough. They keep holding me to a higher standard, and they keep making me grow. So I think that's one sense in which this either or is wrong, and that the answer really is both and. Now, executing that's not easy, but at least it gives you a sense of what you're looking to achieve as a parent or as a leader.
Yeah, cool. Can I ask our audience if you could just like share who in your life has been that source of tremendous warmth and support, and unconditional sort of just like affirmation and love, and who in your life has been a source of like tremendous, like holding you accountable and your feet to the fire and all of that, right? And the more demanding version, because when I think about it, in my case, the former was my mother and the latter was my father. And I tell you, if I had to choose between one of them, I'd go for my mom. I don't want to choose. I want them both, but like my mom would be the kind of person I just want to like melt in her arms, when
and everything's great. You're wonderful.
I'd just be loud forever, And then my dad was like, I'd come home with like a 97 out of 100 in my math exam. And
where's the last 3 points?
Yeah, what happened to the last 3?
I think for me it's the same, by the way. And my mother is just, a fountain of kindness, and doesn't even have, it seems, the capability to be critical. And then my dad was the opposite. I don't have data on this, Hitendra, but I have a hypothesis that for many of us, even though it's possible to be both at once, so I want you to aspire to that individually as a parent, but I do think that many of us have had these kind of located in two people. However you're going to get your fix of support and demandingness, I do think you should seek it out, right? Like don't seek out only demandingness, like where's your self-esteem and your confidence going to come from? But also don't just, and I'm know this is true of you. Like, you don't just want to be with people who just tell you like you're great all the time. I know that you're always trying to get better. So I do think whether it's in two people or maybe even more than two people, like we should each of us seek out support and demandingness so that we can keep getting better.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. We are going to be out of time in the next 2 minutes. Folks, can I ask you to just share in chat, like what's your wish for Angela? If you have to like send a message out to Angela, because even if we don't have time to read them all here, I'm gonna like download this chat and send it to you, Angela. Right?
Thank
And
you. I would love that.
yeah, so can you all just take a moment and just like, you've been so kind, so thoughtful. You're a bundle of just wisdom and joy, at the same time, to be with us, Angela. And we'd love to see what's on people's hearts and minds in terms of their wish for you. As they're doing that, guys, so let's contribute that way. I'm really enjoying seeing what you're talking about the people who supported you. Angela, could you maybe to close out, share with us, as you look in the years ahead, at a time when humanity is troubled, right? It's going through a perfect storm in so many regards. What's your big dream?
I'm wearing this vest that says Character Lab, and on this side it says Character Lab. And if you want to visit me, you can come to characterlab.org. And I will say this, every culture and every spiritual tradition has said that it's important to try to be a good person, to live a good life for yourself and others at the same time. And that to me is what character is. It's being honest and kind, grateful and generous, curious, creative, humble, persistent, disciplined, and I guess I would say this, my dream and my hope is that because we know that there is science behind every single one of those elements that I mentioned, now all of these spiritual traditions from around the world have been saying this is important. Maybe in the 21st century, and I know it seems improbable given the very current circumstances in which maybe we could get even better and more efficient at developing our character. And I think that's what will, it's a very old-fashioned concept in a way, but I think I imagine a future where, we could each of us say, like, I'm going to be more honest and more kind, more generous, more grateful, more curious, more humble, more gritty, more self-disciplined, and all the rest. So I think that's why I was excited for this conversation. I love the interaction you're having with the chat and the audience, and I'm looking forward to future conversations because I think we're on the same wavelength there.
Yes, so beautiful, Angela. It reminds me of a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. She said, "Character building begins in infancy and ends only at death." Isn't that sweet?
Wonderful, and I'm a big Eleanor Roosevelt fan. So
yeah. So am I. So am I.
You.
I've actually been deeply in love with her recently. But I was working on some part of her in my book. I need to let you go though, but we will look forward to having our paths cross again, both between us, but also with our community. I'm so grateful, as I know all of us, Angela, to have you with us today. Godspeed, stay well, and do continue to do this beautiful work that you're doing.
Okay, so until next time. Yeah. Bye, Hitendra. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye. Folks, I'm on such a high. It's just hard for me to right now be very cogent in my thinking. That was such a powerhouse of insights, thoughts, and ideas, right? This notion of recognizing the power of the long run play in any commitment you take on, making it come from a place where you have that star, right? That is pointing you in the right direction. Even while conditions around you materially are changing all the time, you're being guided by that star to continue to adapt to the world, but stay on course, right? The notion that as you're doing so, look for joy, and have that conviction that the journey itself will be joyful, not just the destination that you're seeking to come to, right? Of zooming out and seeing this in the larger frame of character development, of seeing that as a lifelong quest, as Angela said, to be a little bit kinder, to be a little bit more resilient and have more grit, step by step, day upon day, doing it in small steps, not losing hope just because there's so much to be done and so many unknowns around us. Offering that kind of both support, but also demandingness, right, in a constructive way to the people that you lead and that you influence in your organizations and at home. And to recognize that science is marching forward in some luminous and beautiful ways. And as Angela and I were, I think, aligning on, bringing spirituality and science really to almost like a common ground with a whole lot of unknowns that we still have to really discover as humanity in the years ahead, right? Thank you for joining us today. I also want to take a quick moment to introduce you to who we will have next time at Intersections. And I also want to just like thank you for your patience today, right? We were on such a fast track with Angela. She had some bounded time because she had to move to another event that just got rescheduled and started a few minutes earlier than she thought. So as we bid a farewell, I want to recognize that I only have so much time to integrate your voice into this, but hopefully you've been enjoying everything that's happening here in chat as well. So let's take a moment to have me introduce our next guest, who we will have with us 2 Thursdays from now. Jamil Zaki. Dr. Zaki is a professor of psychology at Stanford, and he has a tremendous insight on the power of something that is such a central force in our world today, much needed, much of interest to both the business world and beyond, which is empathy. Jamil has written a book called The War for Kindness. It's a great sort of unpacking of this quality of empathy. Here you see in testimonial from just Angela Duckworth herself, right? In this masterpiece, Jamil weaves together the very latest science with stories that will stay in your heart forever. What a beautiful testimonial. And our own Carol Dweck, the pioneer in growth mindset, who used to be with RC at Columbia, now is at Stanford, also talking about how Jamil gives us a revolutionary perspective on empathy. Empathy can be developed. And when it is, people, relationships, organizations, and cultures are changed. How beautiful as well. Jamil and I have been privileged to I have been privileged to work together with Jamil, along with our team here at Mentora. In fact, Jamil and my colleague, Dr. Josh Davis, who is our chief scientist at Mentora, they were roommates, in the doctoral days. And so it's been a real joy to get to know him as a human being as well, just like we did with Angela today. These are not just great intellects and scientists, but also just wonderful human beings. So I look forward very much to that moment with you all. Until then, stay safe, stay well. Write to me from time to time if you can with ideas and thoughts about other people that you would like to see on Intersections, other topics that you'd like to see us cover, and anything else on your mind. All right. Take care, Godspeed, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye. Namaste.